Terminator, this Sarah Connor Chronicles, Coco Cameron. The sky was in Kai, and the bonfires of New Los Angeles danced before her eyes. He took the first puff and parted his lips to let out fine white wisps. He took a deep breath, taking in the untouched smoke from his lungs through his nose, then through his mouth, until it burned his throat, and he hung his head for a moment, leaning against the balcony rail, letting the nicotine and carbon monoxide dissolve his anguish. He did it again, without a single pause, until his lungs were choking and the bonfires were spinning around him, little fireflies flickering far below his feet, close to the glazed asphalt of the city. In less than 180 seconds, the cigarette was completely consumed. That's how John Connor liked to smoke. He left the cigarette butt in an old metal coffee pot, which, if he remembered correctly, must date from 2014. On the pot was a picture of a Native American family under the inscription, Fair Trade 1, 100% recyclable. John Connor pulled a small chrome packet from his pocket. The cigarettes were loaded with opium, just enough to relax his body and mind, a little more than a normal cigarette would do. He placed one between his lips and struck a storm match. Behind him, he heard the flat door open softly. Few people had the privilege of entering the warlord's quarters without knocking. Familiar footsteps made their way into the flat. He quickly put the cigarette away in his shirt pocket and threw the match over the railing, which joined the bonfires 100 meters below. He left the coffee pot on the tiled floor of the balcony and re-entered the flat through the French window. He hoped the smell wouldn't give him away. "You're home early," he said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. She smiled at him and headed for the office. It was an old wooden desk, riddled with small black spots and coffee circles. A typewriter and an oil lamp sat in one corner. The rest was covered with cards, missives, and letters from his lieutenants, scattered as if a wave of paper had broken on the rough wooden surface. Cameron turned his back to him and placed his shoulder bag on top of the papers. The separation of the northern sector between the clans took less time than expected, she informed him without turning round. She unpacked her bag, the keys to the flat, an assortment of documents in different colored folders, and a thermos of coffee. "What were you doing?" she asked in a conversational tone. She began to pull a new pile of documents from her bag. Without a word, John stood up and walked towards her. He put his arms around her hips and his hands on her stomach. He gently stroked the hollow of her neck with his nose. Nothing special," he said. He slowly traced circles on her stomach with his fingertips. John felt Cameron's body relax in his arms and her back press more firmly against him. "John, what are you doing?" "I just smell your hair." They smelled like the rainforest of her childhood. They also smelled like the heat of the desert. They smelled of the raspberry in his shampoo and the perfume she put on for him. They smelled the fine film of sweat on his sheets, and they smelled like his sex, only softer. They smelled femininity and animal desire, but most of all, they smelled Cameron. She stiffened. "You've been smoking," she declared. "No, I don't smell of cigarettes. It's the bonfires." "It's not the smell. It's you." He lifted her hair and placed a line of kisses on the nape of her neck. Once again, her body relaxed under his caresses. "John," she whispered, "maybe I'm glad to see you. You're always happy to see me, but you don't usually touch me like that." He moved his lips to her collarbone and murmured against her skin, a low growl coming from deep in his throat. "Don't tell me you don't like it." He slipped a hand under her jumper. "You've always liked it." He played his thumb around his navel. Cameron inhaled quickly and gripped the edge of the desk. "John," his voice was a tiny bit more than a whisper, "stop." He brought his hands up higher under his jumper. "Why would I do that?" His palm enveloped a small breast, firm and perfect. He knew that the skin was as white as milk and that the areola was dark pink, almost brown, like her hair. "You know I'm in charge," he breathed. His thumb, the skin roughened by time, found a blood-soaked nipple. Cameron stifled a groan and threw his head back. "If you're doing this because of the opium." She didn't finish her sentence. John slipped his other hand under the fabric of her knickers and slowly caressed her pubis. Her hair glided like down under his fingers, and he had to restrain himself from ripping off his jeans and plunging his face between her thighs. He knew that her smell could make him lose his mind. It was worth all the opium, ecstasy, or any other drug he could imagine. "I love you, Cameron," he whispered in her ear. She turned round, freed her arms, and placed a small pale hand on his chest. Her brows were furrowed, and her voice, which a second earlier had been hoarse with pleasure and desire for his caresses, was now half stuck in her throat. "John, no." He gave her the smile she couldn't resist. She didn't react and pushed him firmly away from her. "No," she repeated. John reached out again and grabbed her hips, but she slipped out of his embrace. She landed in the middle of the room, near the bed and away from him. then crossed her little arms and tucked her hands under her armpits. Her gaze never left the linoleum. Cameron, stop it. John, don't repeat it. Your judgment is impaired. What? You smoked? And it wasn't all nicotine. Cameron, you know it calms me, he sighed. It's never impaired my fucking judgment. I know, she says, tilting her head. It's war. Smoking takes the stress away. You tell me that enough. But you've been smoking a lot lately. Do you really think that's it? Huh, is that what you really think, Cameron? War? John, don't ask me that. You know damn well why I'm trying every possible way to relax my fucking brain. Cameron swallowed and held his voice. John, you know it, Cameron, so say it. John, she said calmly. He walked the distance between them and took her by the shoulders. Say it, Cameron. She didn't say a word. She lifted her chin and stared at him with two big wet brown eyes. You're not in charge, they said. John shook his small body between his hands. Just fucking say it. I nearly died, she cried in a high-pitched voice. She pulled away again and turned her back to him. John sighed. The hurricane raging inside him vanished in an instant as he stroked her arm. Cameron, he said close to her ear, I'm so scared for you. He swallowed hard, letting the memories of the last month crawl up inside him. They were still vivid and cut through his mind like a razor. When Perry came back, he murmured, you weren't moving. You were like a broken doll in his arms. She took his hand in hers and gave it a gentle squeeze. I'm scared for you too, she said. Then she turned round and tilted her head to one side. Her gaze expressed nothing. It was that of a machine. She backed away slowly until her back touched the wall. She spoke in a cold voice. But that's how things are. I'm your protector. I ache for you, not the other way around. John turned away. He couldn't look at her now. He walked over to the desk, away from her, and put his fists on the rough wood. He took a deep breath. Keep cool, keep cool. He recited the same mantra before a battle. Keep your cool, because machines don't have a cool head and they don't make mistakes. Suddenly his blood boiled with anger. He swept away all the papers, the attack plans, his lieutenant's reports, the engineer's reports, and Cameron's neon pink and yellow shirts. He didn't give a shit about any of that anymore. He turned back to Cameron. In 3 strides, he was on top of her. He was surprised to feel tears rolling down his unshaven cheeks. He couldn't remember ever crying in front of anyone in his life. His voice had changed, too. It wasn't the deep, authoritative voice with which he addressed his troops. This voice seemed to come from another body. It was trembling and full of everything he could feel. Because you think it doesn't hurt me, he shouted. It feels like lava in my stomach. Every shot I hear, I'm afraid it's for you. It's war, people are dying. People, not you. John, your feelings alter. Fucking hell, Cameron. Will you stop this shit? I'm not worth more than a human life. Is that what you think? It is what it is. I'd let them all die for you. Don't say that. I'll let them get vitrified one by one, and I'll watch if I have to. Don't say that. And why is that? Because I'm just a machine. Nobody has to die for me. I would die for you. John, I'll throw myself at a cyborg with my bare hands if it buys you a few seconds. Stop it. And do you know why? Stop it. Because I fucking love you, she slapped him. The next moment, she was in his arms. Cameron didn't sleep to rest. She didn't need to. She was a machine, a tireless metal skeleton. No, Cameron slept to dream. A state of vulnerability that required her to be in complete confidence, she had confided to John. Sure, she could tell anyone she wanted 1,000 times that she was the protector, but Cameron Phillips knew deep down that while she was dreaming, her life was in John Connor's hands forever. John lovingly stroked Cameron's long hair before moving slowly down the small of her back. He worked his way up her body, tracing with his fingertip the scar left by the thermite grenade. She was lying on top of him, 2 arms as thick as her wrists wrapped around her neck. While she was dreaming of him, he hoped. She clutched the blanket or his shoulder in her small fists and sometimes murmured words that were almost inaudible. Breasts pressed against his chest and the hairs of her sex on his lower stomach. His hard-on was aching, but he had no intention of waking her because the orgasm he had managed to give her in the middle of the night, after the first 2 times, seemed to have relaxed her perfectly. John preferred to let himself be carried away by Cameron's perfume. He had already mooted the idea of bottling it under the name Cameron No. 5. She had preferred Coco Cameron. And as he continued to caress her body, John sank into a curiously lucid half-sleep. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and he had forgotten to close the curtains on the French window when he left the balcony the day before. He knew that the sky was clear and the air cold and dry. The sun was still low, and a yellow-orange heat was pouring into the room. The bonfires must have been extinguished by now. The celebrations of the capture of the northern sector turned into a deep alcoholic sleep. Cameron stretched against him, like a cat seeking its master's caresses in the morning. John Connor took a deep breath of Cameron. Their lips met and didn't leave each other for a long time. He made tender love to her twice. Later, when he got up, he went and leaned against the railing of the balcony to observe New Los Angeles, as he liked to do. He returned to the bedroom to find his shirt lying in a ball on the floor. He picked up the chromium-plated metal case and retrieved the little catchu box where he kept his opium powder. He also took the half-finished bottle of bourbon from behind the books on nuclear engineering and headed back to the balcony. There, he carefully picked up the coffee pot that had been his ashtray for years and put the whole thing in a bin liner, which he sent down the rubbish chute without a second thought. The sun was now high in the sky, warming his bare skin nicely. In the bedroom, he heard Cameron calling his name. The war wasn't over, far from it, but it was going to be a wonderful day, and John Connor had every intention of making the most of it.